Racist cop tries to arrest black woman, but her influence ends his job. In this eye-opening video, we delve into a shocking incident involving a police officer and a courageous black woman. It highlights an alarming abuse of power. The encounter unfolds when a racially charged confrontation escalates, leading to a significant turning point in both of their lives. If you are enthusiastic about this narrative, please inform us. If you appreciated the video, press 1. If not, select 0. Your feedback genuinely motivates me to collect additional uplifting and significant narratives.
Tonight, as she made her way to a construction site on the outskirts of the city, Monica's focus was razor sharp. A series of anonymous complaints had landed on her desk earlier in the week, detailing unsafe working conditions, exploitation of migrant workers, and even rumors of illegal payments to city officials. The complaints had been signed with trembling hands and vague initials, but Monica didn't need names to know that these workers were afraid. Fear was a constant companion for people who worked under the thumb of corrupt contractors and indifferent authorities. But fear, Monica believed, was no reason to stay silent. It was why she was here, wearing a practical black suit and sturdy shoes, with a leather satchel slung over her shoulder that contained every legal statute and safety regulation she might need tonight. The construction site was massive, a sprawling labyrinth of steel beams, towering cranes, and pits dug deep into the earth. Floodlights cast harsh shadows over the skeletal structure of what would one day become another luxury high-rise. The air smelled of damp soil, gasoline, and metal, a mixture that clung to the skin. Most of the workers had already left for the day, but a few remained, their figures moving like ghosts in the dim light. Monica noticed the faint glow of a cigarette in the distance and the clanging of tools being put away for the night. She had been told that the night shift often saw the worst abuses: unpaid hours, unsafe practices, and brutal deadlines enforced by contractors who knew the workers had no recourse. Monica had arranged to meet one of these workers tonight, a young man named Miguel, who had contacted her anonymously but had finally agreed to speak in person. He had said in his last message, "If they see me talking to you, I could lose everything. But this has to stop." As Monica approached the site, her heels clicked against the asphalt, their sound swallowed by the hum of machinery still running in the background. She passed a faded sign that read "Authorized personnel only" and stepped onto the gravel path leading to the heart of the site. Her eyes scanned the area, alert to every movement. It wasn't paranoia, it was experience. Years of working in volatile environments had taught her that danger often came when you least expected it. She reached the agreed-upon meeting point, a small makeshift office trailer set apart from the main construction area. The trailer's door was slightly ajar, and the dim yellow light spilling out onto the gravel suggested someone was inside. Monica glanced at her watch. Miguel should have been here by now. She stepped closer, her hand tightening around the strap of her satchel. Before she could reach the trailer, a voice cut through the night, sharp and commanding. "You lost, lady?" Monica turned to see a police officer standing a few feet away, his silhouette framed by the harsh glare of a nearby floodlight. He was tall, broad-shouldered, and exuded an air of authority that bordered on intimidation. His uniform was impeccably neat, his badge gleaming under the light. But it was his eyes that caught Monica's attention, cold, calculating, and filled with something darker than suspicion. "This is private property," he said, stepping closer. "You can't just walk in here like you own the place." Monica straightened her posture, meeting his gaze without flinching. "I'm not lost, officer," she replied, her tone calm but firm. "I'm here on legal business. My name is Monica Harris, and I'm a civil rights attorney. I have every right to be here." The officer's lips curled into a smirk, but there was no humor in it. "A lawyer, huh? And what kind of legal business brings you to a construction site in the middle of the night? His voice dripped with sarcasm, and Monica could feel the hostility radiating off him. She had dealt with men like him before, men who saw her skin color and gender as an affront to their authority. I'm investigating complaints about unsafe working conditions and labor violations, she said evenly. Now, if you'll excuse me, I have an appointment to keep. She turned to continue toward the trailer, but the officer stepped into her path, blocking her way. Not so fast, he said, his smirk fading into a scowl. You don't just get to walk in here and start poking around. You got any proof of these so-called complaints? Or are you just here to cause trouble? Monica took a slow breath, steadying herself. She knew this was a power play, a test to see if she would back down. But backing down wasn't in her nature. My proof is in this satchel, she said, lifting it slightly. And if you'd like to see it, I'd be happy to show you once you provide your badge number and explain why you're interfering in a lawful investigation. Her words were measured, but there was steel in her voice. The officer's eyes narrowed, his jaw tightening. For a moment, the tension between them hung thick in the air. Then he laughed, a low, mocking sound that sent a chill down Monica's spine. You've got guts, I'll give you that, he said. But guts won't get you far around here. He stepped closer, invading her personal space. Monica didn't move, refusing to give him the satisfaction of seeing her intimidated. Their standoff was interrupted by the sound of footsteps. Monica turned her head slightly, catching sight of a young man emerging from the shadows. It was Miguel, his face pale and his eyes darting nervously between Monica and the officer. Is everything okay? Miguel asked hesitantly, his voice barely above a whisper. The officer's gaze shifted to Miguel, and his expression hardened. You know this woman? He demanded. Miguel hesitated, then nodded. She's here to help, he said quietly. Help? The officer repeated, his tone dripping with disdain. That's funny. I don't remember anyone asking for her help. He took a step toward Miguel, who instinctively took a step back. You better think real hard about who you're siding with, kid, the officer said, his voice low and menacing. Monica felt her patience wearing thin. That's enough, she said firmly. Officer, if you have an issue with me being here, I suggest you take it up with the city council. Until then, I'd appreciate it if you stopped harassing my client. The officer's eyes snapped back to her, and for a moment, she thought he might actually strike her. Instead, he let out a sharp breath and took a step back. Fine, he said. Do what you came to do. But don't say I didn't warn you. With that, he turned and walked away, his footsteps heavy against the gravel. Monica exhaled slowly, her shoulders relaxing slightly. She turned to Miguel, who was still standing frozen in place. Are you okay? She asked gently. Miguel nodded, though his hands were trembling. I didn't think he'd be here tonight, he admitted. He usually doesn't come around this late. Monica placed a reassuring hand on his shoulder. It's okay, she said. You did the right thing by contacting me. Now let's get to work. Together they entered the trailer, leaving the tension of the encounter behind them for now. The construction site was eerily quiet as Monica and Miguel stepped into the small trailer. The air inside was stale, a mixture of dust and oil, and the single overhead light flickered faintly, casting long, uneven shadows on the walls. Miguel hesitated near the door, his nervous energy almost palpable. Monica placed her satchel on the makeshift desk at the center of the room, her movement steady and deliberate. She wanted to set the tone for their conversation, to show Miguel that she wasn't rattled by the confrontation with the officer outside. This wasn't the first time she had faced intimidation, and it wouldn't be the last. Take a seat, she said gently, motioning to a folding chair near the desk. Miguel obeyed, sitting stiffly as though even the act of sitting might incriminate him. Monica lowered herself into the chair opposite him, pulling out her notebook and a pen. She glanced up at him, offering a small, reassuring smile. "You're doing the right thing," she said, "but I need you to tell me everything. Start from the beginning." Miguel swallowed hard, his hands gripping the edges of the chair as though it might anchor him in place. "It's bad," he began, his voice barely above a whisper. "Worse than I said in the messages." He glanced at the door, as if expecting the officer to burst in at any moment. Monica followed his gaze, then turned her attention back to him. "You're safe here," she said firmly. "No one can intimidate you. Not while I'm here." Miguel nodded but didn't seem convinced. "The contractors, they don't care about safety," he continued, his words coming out in a rush. "They push us to work faster even when the equipment is broken or the scaffolding isn't secure. They don't let us take breaks. And if someone complains..." He trailed off, his eyes darting to the floor. Monica leaned forward slightly, her pen poised over the notebook. "What happens if someone complains?" she prompted. Miguel hesitated, then looked up at her, his eyes filled with a mix of fear and guilt. "They disappear," he said. "Not literally, but they get fired. No explanation, no severance. And for some of us," his voice cracked, and he shook his head, "some of us don't even have papers. They threaten to call immigration if we don't do what they say." Monica's grip on the pen tightened, her knuckles turning white. She had suspected as much, but hearing it confirmed was like a punch to the gut. Exploitation of undocumented workers was a well-worn tactic among corrupt contractors, but it never failed to infuriate her. "And what about the accidents?" she asked. "The ones you mentioned in your complaint?" Miguel's face darkened, and he shook his head slowly. "There's been 3 this month," he said. "One guy fell from the scaffolding. Another got his hand crushed by a faulty machine. And last week..." He hesitated, his voice breaking. "Last week a man fell into one of the pits. The rebar wasn't covered. And he didn't finish the sentence, but he didn't have to." Monica's stomach churned at the thought. She had seen the aftermath of such negligence before, and it was never anything short of horrific. "And the contractors?" she asked, her voice steady despite the storm brewing inside her. "What do they do when these accidents happen?" Miguel's expression hardened, and for the first time, Monica saw a flicker of anger beneath his fear. "They cover it up," he said. "They pay off the families, tell them not to talk to anyone. And if the families don't take the money..." He shook his head again, his jaw tightening. "They make them regret it." Monica nodded slowly, jotting down everything he said. She had heard similar stories before, but every time it felt like a new betrayal. These were human lives, reduced to nothing more than disposable tools in the eyes of the people in power. "And the police?" she asked. "Do they know what's going on here?" Miguel let out a bitter laugh, though there was no humor in it. "Of course they know," he said. "They're part of it. That officer outside, he's always around, making sure no one steps out of line. I've seen him take envelopes from the contractors. He's in their pocket." Monica set down her pen, her jaw tightening. She had suspected corruption, but the confirmation stoked a fire inside her. This wasn't just about unsafe working conditions or labor violations. This was about an entire system designed to exploit and silence the vulnerable. "Thank you for telling me this," she said, her voice firm. "You're brave, Miguel, and I promise you I won't let this go." Miguel nodded, though the fear in his eyes remained. "What now?" he asked. "What do we do?" Monica reached into her satchel and pulled out a folder filled with legal documents. "We start by documenting everything," she said. "I'll need names, dates, anything you can remember. and then we'll take this to court." She paused, her gaze steady. "But I need you to understand this won't be easy. They'll try to scare you, to make you back down. Are you ready for that?" Miguel hesitated, then nodded. "I'm ready," he said. "I can't keep working like this, knowing people are getting hurt. It has to stop." Monica smiled, though it was tinged with sadness. She knew the road ahead would be long and difficult, but Miguel's courage gave her hope. Together, they began to go through the details, piecing together a timeline of events that painted a damning picture of negligence and corruption. But just as they were making progress, the door to the trailer slammed open. Monica and Miguel both jumped, their heads snapping toward the noise. Standing in the doorway was the officer, his face twisted into a scowl. "What the hell are you doing in here?" he demanded, his voice sharp and accusatory. He stepped inside, his presence filling the small space like a storm cloud. Miguel shrank back in his chair, his earlier resolve evaporating in an instant. Monica rose from her seat, her expression calm but her heart racing. "We're having a private meeting," she said evenly. "You have no right to barge in here." The officer's eyes narrowed, and he took another step forward, his hand resting on the baton at his hip. "I don't think you understand how this works," he said. "This is my site, and you don't get to do anything here without my say-so." Monica squared her shoulders, refusing to be intimidated. "This isn't your site," she said. "This is a public safety issue, and I have every right to investigate it. Now, if you'll excuse us, we have work to do." She moved to step around him, but he blocked her path, his stance aggressive. "You think you're so smart, don't you?" he sneered. "Coming in here, stirring up trouble. Let me tell you something, you're out of your depth." Monica met his gaze, her eyes unwavering. "Maybe," she said, "but you're out of time. People like you always are." The officer's face darkened, and for a moment Monica thought he might lash out. Instead, he turned to Miguel, his voice low and threatening. "And you," he said, "you think she's going to save you? You think she cares about you? You're nothing to her. Just another pawn in her game." Miguel didn't respond, his eyes fixed on the floor. Monica's heart ached for him, but she couldn't let the officer see her sympathy. "We're done here," she said, her voice firm. "Leave, or I'll file a complaint with your department." The officer let out a sharp laugh, his teeth bared in a cruel grin. "Good luck with that," he said. "You don't know who you're dealing with." With that, he turned and stormed out, slamming the door behind him. The trailer shook from the force, and Miguel let out a shaky breath. Monica placed a hand on his shoulder, her grip steady. "Don't let him scare you," she said. "We're going to win this, I promise." Miguel nodded, though the fear in his eyes remained. Monica knew the officer wasn't done with them, but she also knew one thing for certain, neither was she. Monica's resolve hardened as the door to the trailer slammed shut behind the officer. The tension in the air was thick, and Miguel's nervous energy was almost palpable as he sat frozen in his chair. His hands gripped the edge of the desk so tightly that his knuckles turned white. Monica didn't move immediately. She remained standing, staring at the door as though willing herself to hold back the storm of emotions rising inside her. She had seen this type of behavior before, the unbridled arrogance of an authority figure who believed himself untouchable. But this time, it felt different. The stakes were higher. Lives were on the line. She turned back to Miguel, forcing her voice to remain calm and steady. "He's trying to intimidate you," she said. "Don't let him." "That's exactly what he wants." Miguel nodded, but his eyes betrayed his fear. He looked like a man caught in a trap with no clear way out. I didn't think he'd come in here like that," he stammered. "He's never been this aggressive before." Monica softened her expression, lowering herself into the chair opposite him. "That's because he knows we're close to the truth," she said. "The closer we get, the more desperate he'll become. Desperation makes people dangerous, but it also makes them sloppy." Miguel swallowed hard, nodding again, though his grip on the desk didn't loosen. "What if he comes back?" he asked. "What if he tries to stop us?" Monica leaned forward, resting her hands on the desk between them. "Then we keep going," she said firmly. "We don't back down. You have a voice, Miguel. You have the truth on your side. That's more powerful than anything he can throw at us." Her words seemed to give him a sliver of hope, though the tension in his body remained. He took a deep breath, finally releasing his grip on the desk. "Okay," he said quietly. "Let's keep going." Monica offered him a small, reassuring smile and opened her notebook again, ready to continue piecing together the story of corruption and exploitation that had plagued this construction site. But before Miguel could say another word, there was a loud, sharp knock on the door. Both of them froze. The knock came again, more insistent this time. Monica's mind raced, her instincts screaming at her to be cautious. She exchanged a glance with Miguel, who looked like he might bolt from the room at any moment. "Stay calm," she said in a low voice, rising from her chair. She walked to the door and opened it slightly, just enough to see who was on the other side. It was the officer again, his face twisted into a scowl. But this time he wasn't alone. Two men stood behind him, both wearing construction helmets and high-visibility vests. Their expressions were unreadable, but there was an undeniable tension in the way they stood, their postures rigid and their hands clenched at their sides. Monica's eyes narrowed. These weren't just workers, they were enforcers. She could see it in the way they carried themselves, in the way they flanked the officer like bodyguards. "We need to talk," the officer said, his voice curt and sharp. Monica didn't budge, her hand tightening on the edge of the door. "I think we've said everything we need to," she replied evenly. The officer's eyes darkened, and he leaned closer, lowering his voice. "You don't get it, do you?" he said. "This isn't your playground. This isn't some courtroom where you can throw around your fancy words and expect everyone to roll over. Out here, we play by different rules." Monica's jaw tightened, but she didn't waver. "I'm well aware of how you play," she said, "and I'm not here to play games. Now, unless you have a warrant or a valid reason to be here, I suggest you leave." The officer's lips curled into a sneer, and he glanced over his shoulder at the two men behind him. "You think you're untouchable, don't you?" he said, his voice dripping with disdain. "You think you can just waltz in here and stir up trouble?" Monica didn't respond. She held his gaze, her silence more powerful than any words she could have spoken. The officer let out a low, bitter laugh and stepped back. "Fine," he said. "Have it your way. But don't say I didn't warn you." He motioned to the two men, and they turned to leave. Monica watched them until they disappeared into the shadows, then slowly closed the door. She turned back to Miguel, who looked more frightened than ever. "This isn't going to end well," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. Monica walked over to him and placed a hand on his shoulder, her grip firm but comforting. "It will end well," she said, "because we're not going to let them win." Before they could resume their conversation, the trailer suddenly shook. A loud crash echoed from outside, followed by shouts and the sound of heavy machinery roaring to life. Monica's heart skipped a beat. She rushed to the window, pulling back the curtain to see what was happening. The construction site was in chaos. Floodlights illuminated the area, casting harsh shadows over the workers who were scrambling in every direction. In the center of it all stood the officer, barking orders at the two men from before. They were gesturing wildly, pointing toward a massive pit at the far end of the site. Monica's eyes narrowed. Something was wrong, very wrong. She turned back to Miguel, who was already on his feet. "Stay here," she said firmly. "Lock the door behind me. Don't let anyone in unless it's me." Miguel hesitated, but the urgency in her voice left no room for argument. He nodded and moved to lock the door as she stepped outside. The cool night air hit her like a slap, but she didn't falter. She made her way toward the commotion, her heels crunching against the gravel. The closer she got, the clearer the scene became. One of the workers was shouting at the officer, his voice filled with anger and frustration. "It's not safe," he yelled. "You can't just..." The officer cut him off, shoving him backward with a force that sent him stumbling. Monica's blood boiled. She quickened her pace, her eyes locked on the officer. "What's going on here?" she demanded, her voice cutting through the chaos like a blade. The officer turned to her, his expression darkening. "This doesn't concern you," he snapped. "Go back to your little trailer and stay out of my way." Monica didn't back down. She stepped closer, her gaze unwavering. "It does concern me," she said. "This entire site concerns me. Now tell me what's going on." The officer's jaw clenched, and for a moment she thought he might lash out. Instead, he motioned toward the pit. "There's been a situation," he said vaguely. Monica followed his gaze and felt her stomach drop. The pit was massive, at least 20 feet deep, with jagged pieces of rebar jutting out from the sides. It looked like a death trap. "What kind of situation?" she pressed. The officer didn't answer. Instead, he stepped closer to her, his posture aggressive. "You're in over your head, lady," he said, his voice low and threatening. "You need to leave. Now." Monica squared her shoulders, refusing to be intimidated. "I'm not going anywhere," she said. "Not until I know what's going on." The officer's eyes flashed with anger, and before she could react, he reached out and grabbed her arm. The next moments unfolded in a blur. Monica felt herself being pulled forward, her body stumbling toward the edge of the pit. She tried to regain her footing, but the officer's grip was too strong. Before she knew it, she was falling. The world seemed to slow as she tumbled into the darkness. Her body hit the ground with a sickening thud, the jagged edges of rebar scraping against her skin. Pain shot through her shoulder and leg, but she bit back a scream. She couldn't afford to show weakness, not now. Above her, she could hear the officer shouting orders, his voice muffled by the ringing in her ears. The edges of her vision blurred, but she forced herself to stay conscious. She had to find a way out. She had to survive. Monica's fingers brushed against something cold and metallic. She looked down and saw a bundle of papers, partially buried in the dirt. Her heart raced. This wasn't just any bundle, these were documents. Evidence, proof of everything the contractors and the officer were trying to hide. She clutched the papers to her chest, ignoring the pain that radiated through her body. She wasn't going to let them win. Not now, not ever. As the shouts from above grew louder, she knew one thing for certain: this fight was far from over. Monica lay at the bottom of the pit, her breaths coming in short, shallow bursts as pain radiated through her body. The cold, hard dirt beneath her scraped against her palms as she tried to push herself upright, her muscles trembling from the effort. Blood trickled down her leg where a jagged piece of rebar had grazed her thigh during the fall, and her shoulder throbbed from where she had landed awkwardly. She glanced up, her vision blurry but clear enough to make out the silhouette of the officer standing at the edge of the pit. His figure was illuminated by the floodlights above, casting a long shadow that seemed to loom over her like a predator stalking its prey. "You should have stayed in the trailer," his voice called down, filled with smug satisfaction. Now look where your curiosity got you." He chuckled, the sound low and cruel, before turning his attention to the workers who had begun gathering near the pit. "Get back to work," he barked at them, his tone sharp and commanding. "Unless you all want to end up like her." Monica's vision cleared enough for her to see the workers exchange uncertain glances. She could feel their hesitation, their fear. It was the same fear Miguel had described, the fear of losing their jobs, their homes, their ability to provide for their families. But amidst the fear there was something else, anger. It simmered just beneath the surface, visible in the way a few of them clenched their fists or took hesitant steps closer to the edge of the pit, as though considering whether to help her. Monica's fingers tightened around the bundle of papers she had found, her knuckles whitening with the effort. She couldn't make out all the details, but even in the dim light, she could see the contractor's letterhead stamped on several pages. Names, numbers, and figures jumped out at her, a trail of evidence that could expose the corruption she had suspected all along. It was as if fate had placed the final piece of the puzzle in her hands, but now she was trapped, injured and vulnerable, with no way to act on it. She forced herself to sit up, biting back a groan as pain shot through her shoulder. "I'm not done," she muttered under her breath, her voice trembling but resolute. She tucked the papers into the waistband of her pants, securing them beneath her shirt. No matter what happened, she wasn't going to let them take this evidence from her. She wouldn't let them win. Above her, the officer began pacing near the edge of the pit, shouting at the workers and gesturing wildly. "Get back to work," I said. He growled. "This doesn't concern you," but his voice betrayed his growing frustration. He could feel the atmosphere shifting. The workers weren't scattering like he had expected. Instead, more of them were gathering, their faces a mixture of concern and defiance. One of them, a young man with a scar running down his cheek, stepped forward, his hands balled into fists. "You pushed her," the man said, his voice loud enough to carry over the noise of the machinery in the background. "We all saw it." There was a murmur of agreement from the others, a ripple of voices that grew louder with each passing second. The officer turned to face them, his expression darkening. "Shut your mouths," he snapped. "This is none of your business." She fell. "That's all there is to it." The young man didn't back down. "We know what we saw," he said, "and we're not going to pretend it didn't happen." His words hung in the air, heavy with challenge. The officer's hand moved to his baton, his fingers curling around it, as he took a threatening step toward the group. "You think you're brave?" he snarled. "You think you're heroes? Let me remind you who's in charge here." Monica watched the confrontation unfold from below, her heart pounding. She could see the tension escalating, the fear and anger over into something volatile. She had to do something before it spiraled out of control, but her body was weak, and her voice felt small in the vastness of the pit. "Help me," she rasped, the words barely audible. She tried again, louder this time. "Help me get out of here." The young man with the scar glanced down at her, his expression softening. He turned to the others, his voice rising above the noise. "We can't leave her down there," he said. "She's here for us. She's fighting for us. Are we just going to let this happen?" His words struck a chord. The murmurs grew louder, and a few workers stepped forward, looking down into the pit, as though calculating how to help her. One of them, an older man with grey streaks in his hair, grabbed a length of rope from a nearby pile of equipment. "What do you think you're doing?" the officer demanded, his voice sharp and commanding. "Step away from that pit." But the older man ignored him, tying a makeshift knot at the end of the rope and tossing it down to Monica. She grabbed hold of it with trembling hands, her fingers slick with sweat and dirt. "Hold on tight," the man called down to her. "We'll pull you up." The officer's face twisted with fury. He stepped toward the older man, raising his baton. I said, "Step away." He shouted. But before he could bring the baton down, another worker intercepted him, grabbing his arm and shoving him back. The officer stumbled, his expression shifting from anger to shock, as the defiance he had tried to suppress finally erupted into open resistance. Monica clung to the rope as the workers began to pull her up, their collective strength overcoming the limitations of her injured body. Every inch felt like a battle, the rough fibers of the rope biting into her palms as she gritted her teeth against the pain. She could hear the shouts and scuffles above her, the clash of voices and the sound of boots scraping against gravel. It was chaos, but amidst the chaos there was hope. They weren't abandoning her. They were standing up, not just for her, but for themselves. When she finally reached the edge of the pit, strong hands grabbed her arms and pulled her onto solid ground. She collapsed onto her knees, gasping for breath, but relief flooded through her as she felt the evidence still secure beneath her shirt. The workers surrounded her, their faces etched with concern. "Are you okay?" one of them asked, his voice filled with genuine worry. Monica nodded, though the pain in her leg and shoulder was almost unbearable. "I'll be fine," she said, her voice hoarse but steady. "Thank you." The officer regained his footing, his face red with rage. "You're all going to regret this," he spat, pointing a finger at the group. "Every single one of you. You think you can get away with this? I'll make sure you pay." His threats hung in the air like a storm cloud, but they no longer had the power they once did. The workers stood their ground, their defiance unshaken. The young man with the scar stepped forward again, his gaze locked on the officer. "We're done being afraid of you," he said. "You don't control us anymore." Monica pushed herself to her feet, her body trembling but her resolve stronger than ever. She turned to the officer, her eyes blazing with determination. "You pushed me into that pit," she said, her voice loud and clear. "You tried to silence me, but you failed, and now I have everything I need to expose you and everyone else involved in this corruption." The officer's expression faltered for the first time, a flicker of uncertainty crossing his face. Monica took a step forward, ignoring the pain that shot through her leg. "You thought you could scare us into submission," she continued, "but all you've done is unite us. Your time is up." The workers erupted into cheers, their voices echoing across the construction site. The officer glanced around, his confidence crumbling as he realized he was outnumbered. He took a step back, his hand hovering over the radio on his belt, but he hesitated. He had lost control, and he knew it. Monica turned to the workers, her gaze sweeping over them. "This isn't just about me," she said. "This is about all of us. Together we can fight this. We can bring them down, but I need your help." The older man with the grey streak stepped forward, placing a hand on her shoulder. "You have it," he said firmly. "We're with you." Monica nodded, a surge of hope rising within her. The battle wasn't over, but for the first time it felt winnable. They had taken the first step, and there was no turning back. Together, they would see this fight through to the end. Monica stood amidst the workers, her body aching from the fall and the effort it had taken to climb out of the pit. Her leg throbbed with each beat of her heart, and her shoulder felt as though it were on fire, but she ignored the pain. She couldn't afford to show weakness, not now. The workers around her were looking to her for direction, their eyes filled with a mixture of fear and hope. It was a fragile balance, and she knew that one wrong move could shatter the courage they had mustered. She squared her shoulders, took a deep breath, and focused on the officer who was still standing a few feet away, his face red with fury. "You don't know what you've started," the officer growled, his voice low and menacing. His hand hovered over the radio clipped to his belt, as though he were debating whether to call for backup. But Monica could see the flicker of doubt in his eyes. He had lost control of the situation, and he knew it. The workers were no longer cowering under his authority. They were standing together, united in their defiance. It was a sight Monica had seen before, but it never failed to stir something powerful within her. This was why she did what she did, to give people the strength to stand up and fight for themselves. "You're right," Monica said, her voice cutting through the tense silence. "You don't know what you've started. You pushed me into that pit, thinking it would silence me. But all you've done is prove that everything these workers said about you and your partners is true. You're corrupt. You're violent. And now you're exposed." The officer's jaw tightened, and his eyes darted to the workers surrounding her. He could see the anger in their faces, the way they clenched their fists and squared their shoulders. He took a step back, his hand still hovering over his radio. "You think you're smart, don't you?" he spat. "You think you can come in here, rile these people up, and walk away like nothing happened? You're out of your depth, lady. You don't know who you're dealing with." Monica took a step forward, ignoring the pain that shot through her leg. "I know exactly who I'm dealing with," she said, her voice steady and unyielding. "I'm dealing with a man who uses his badge as a weapon to intimidate and oppress. A man who's more concerned with protecting his own interests than protecting the people he's supposed to serve. And let me tell you something, you're not going to get away with it." The workers murmured their agreement, their voices growing louder and more confident. The officer's eyes darted around the group, his frustration mounting. "You think you're all safe now because you're standing together?" he sneered. "You think this changes anything? You're just a bunch of laborers. No one's going to believe you over me." "That's where you're wrong," Monica said. She reached beneath her shirt and pulled out the bundle of papers she had tucked away. The workers gasped as they saw her hold up the documents, the contractor's letterhead clearly visible under the floodlights. "This is proof," she said, her voice rising. "Proof of everything you and your corrupt partners have been doing. The bribes, the unsafe working conditions, the threats. It's all here, and now it's in the hands of the people who are going to bring you down." The officer's face twisted into a snarl, and in one swift motion, he grabbed his baton and lunged toward her. Monica braced herself, but before he could reach her, one of the workers stepped between them. It was Miguel. His hands were shaking, but his stance was firm as he blocked the officer's path. "That's enough," Miguel said, his voice trembling but resolute. "You're not touching her. Not anymore." The officer froze, clearly caught off guard by Miguel's sudden bravery. But his surprise quickly turned to anger, and he raised his baton, ready to strike. Before he could, another worker stepped forward, and then another, until the officer was surrounded. They didn't say a word, but their presence spoke volumes. The officer hesitated, his grip on the baton tightening as he looked around at the faces staring him down. For the first time, he seemed to realize that he was outnumbered and outmatched. "You're all making a big mistake," he said, his voice faltering slightly. "You think you're heroes? You think this is going to end well for you? Let me tell you something, it won't. You're just digging your own graves." "No," Monica said, her voice cutting through his threats. "You're the one who's in a hole, and the deeper you dig, the harder it's going to be for you to climb out." The workers began to move as one, pushing the officer back step by step. He stumbled, his confidence crumbling with each retreat. "This isn't over," he hissed, his voice desperate now. "You'll regret this. All of you." Miguel turned to Monica, his expression determined. "What do we do now?" he asked. Monica looked at him. at the workers who had risked everything to stand up to their oppressor, and felt a surge of pride and responsibility. "We make sure the truth comes out," she said. "We take these documents and bring them to the people who can do something about it. The contractors, the authorities, everyone involved in this corruption. They're going to face justice." The officer's radio crackled to life, and Monica tensed as a voice came through. "Unit 34, what's your status?" "Over." The officer hesitated, his hand trembling as he reached for the radio. "Unit 34, respond." "Over." He glanced at Monica and the workers, his face a mask of frustration and fear. Finally, he lifted the radio to his lips. "Unit 34, all clear," he said, his voice tight. "No assistance needed." "Over." He lowered the radio, his shoulders slumping as he realized he had no choice but to back down. The workers didn't relax, their eyes still locked on him, their stance unwavering. "You should leave," Monica said, her tone firm, "before you make this worse for yourself." The officer glared at her, but he didn't argue. He shoved his baton back into its holster and turned on his heel, stalking away from the group. The workers watched him go, their silence heavy with unspoken relief and lingering tension. When he was finally out of sight, they turned back to Monica, their faces a mixture of exhaustion and determination. "What now?" one of them asked, his voice breaking the silence. Monica looked at the bundle of papers in her hands, then back at the group. "Now we finish what we started," she said. "This isn't just about one corrupt cop or one shady contractor. This is about changing the system that allowed them to operate in the first place, and we're going to do it together." Miguel nodded, his expression resolute. "We're with you," he said. The others murmured their agreement, their voices growing stronger with each passing moment. Monica felt a surge of hope as she looked at them. They had faced fear, intimidation, and violence, but they hadn't backed down. They had stood together, and now they were ready to fight for the justice they deserved. As they began to make their way off the construction site, Monica couldn't help but glance back at the pit. It loomed in the distance, a dark, gaping reminder of the danger they had faced. But it was also a symbol of something more, a place where the truth had been unearthed, where the first steps toward change had been taken. She turned away, her resolve stronger than ever. The fight wasn't over, but they had already won the first battle, and that was enough to keep her moving forward. Monica's body ached with every step as she and the workers moved away from the chaotic construction site. The documents she had recovered were still tucked securely under her shirt, pressed against her skin like a shield. Her leg throbbed, and her shoulder protested every movement, but she refused to stop. The workers surrounding her were tense but resolute, their faces lit by the faint glow of streetlights as they left the harsh floodlights of the site behind them. Despite the physical toll and the mounting tension, Monica's mind was focused entirely on what came next. She knew that the evidence she carried was damning, but she also knew it wasn't enough on its own. They needed a plan, and they needed it fast. Miguel walked beside her, his hands balled into fists. "He's not going to let this go," he said, his voice low but edged with urgency. "That cop, the contractors, they'll come after us. They'll try to destroy everything." Monica glanced at him, her expression grim but determined. "Let them try," she replied. "We're not alone in this anymore. We have the truth on our side, and we have each other. That's more than they'll ever have." Behind them, the other workers murmured their agreement, their voices a quiet but powerful chorus of support. Monica's chest swelled with pride at their courage. These were people who had been silenced and oppressed for so long, yet here they were, standing up and fighting back. It was a testament to their strength, and a reminder of why she couldn't afford to fail. As they reached a quieter part of the neighborhood, one of the older workers stepped forward, his brow furrowed with concern. "What's the next move?" he asked. "We can't just sit on this evidence and hope it does the work for us. They'll come after it, and after us, if we're not careful." Monica nodded, already considering their options. "We need to get this to someone who can act on it," she said. "The city council, the media, anyone who can expose what's been happening here. But first, we need to make copies of everything. If they try to destroy the originals, they won't be able to bury the truth completely." Miguel nodded, his expression hardening with resolve. "I know a place," he said. "A print shop a few blocks from here. The owner's a friend of mine. He'll help us." Monica hesitated for a moment, considering the risk, but she could see no better option. "Let's do it," she said. "The sooner we make those copies, the safer we'll be." The group moved quickly but cautiously, keeping to the shadows as they made their way to the print shop. Miguel led the way, his familiarity with the area guiding them through alleys and side streets. When they arrived, the shop was dark, its windows shuttered and its sign unlit. Miguel knocked on the back door, his fist rapping against the metal in a deliberate pattern. A moment later, the door creaked open, and a man in his late 40s peered out. His face was lined with weariness, but his eyes were sharp and alert. "Miguel?" the man said, his voice tinged with surprise. "What are you doing here this late?" Miguel stepped closer, his tone urgent. "We need your help, Carlos. It's important." Carlos's gaze flicked to the group behind Miguel, his expression tightening as he took in their disheveled appearances. "Come in," he said, stepping aside to let them enter. The interior of the shop was cramped but orderly, filled with shelves of paper and boxes of supplies. A large printer sat against one wall, its screen glowing faintly in the dim light. Carlos closed the door behind them, locking it with a series of bolts before turning back to Miguel. "What's going on?" he asked. Miguel gestured to Monica, who stepped forward and pulled the bundle of documents from under her shirt. "This," she said, her voice steady despite the weight of the moment. "This is evidence of corruption, exploitation, and negligence at the construction site where we work. We need to make copies of it before they try to destroy it." Carlos's eyes widened as he took in the papers, his hand brushing over the contractor's letterhead. "This is serious," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "If what's in here is what I think it is," he trailed off, shaking his head, "you're putting yourselves in a lot of danger." "We already know that," Monica said firmly. "But we're not backing down. Can you help us or not?" Carlos met her gaze, his expression softening. "I'll help," he said, "but we need to move fast. If anyone finds out you're here—" He didn't finish the sentence, but the unspoken warning hung heavy in the air. Carlos moved quickly, setting up the printer and feeding the documents into the scanner. The machine hummed to life, its light flickering as it began to copy the pages. Monica and the workers watched in silence, the tension in the room palpable. Every sound outside, a car passing, a dog barking, felt like a potential threat. Monica's fingers twitched at her sides, her body coiled like a spring, ready to react at the slightest hint of danger. The process felt agonizingly slow, each page taking seconds that stretched into eternity. Monica's mind raced with contingency plans. What if the officer found them? What if the contractors had sent someone to follow them? The possibilities churned in her head, each more unsettling than the last. Finally, the printer spat out the last page, and Carlos gathered the copies into a neat stack. "Here," he said, handing them to Monica. "Take these and get them somewhere safe. And be careful. They're not going to let this go without a fight." Monica nodded, tucking the copies into her satchel. "Thank you," she said. "We won't forget this." Carlos gave her a tight smile, his expression one of quiet solidarity. "Good luck," he said. You're going to need it." The group left the print shop as quietly as they had entered, their nerves on edge as they made their way back into the night. Monica's mind was already on the next step: who to contact, where to deliver the evidence, but her thoughts were interrupted by the sudden roar of an engine. A black SUV screeched to a halt at the end of the alley, its headlights cutting through the darkness like twin daggers. Monica froze, her breath catching in her throat as the vehicle's doors flew open. The officer stepped out, his face twisted with rage, flanked by two men in contractor uniforms. Their presence confirmed Monica's worst fears. The contractors were directly involved, and they weren't about to let her walk away with the evidence. Well, the officer sneered, his voice echoing off the brick walls of the alley. "You really don't know when to quit, do you?" He took a step forward, his baton already in his hand. "You've made this a lot harder than it needed to be. But don't worry, I'm going to make sure you regret it." The workers closed ranks around Monica, their bodies forming a protective barrier. Miguel stepped forward, his fists clenched at his sides. "You're not touching her," he said, his voice shaking but resolute. The officer's lips curled into a mocking smile. "How noble," he said. "But you're out of your league, kid. Do you really think you can stop me?" Monica's mind raced as she assessed the situation. They were outnumbered, and the officer and his men were clearly prepared for violence. But they couldn't afford to lose the evidence. It was their only chance to expose the corruption and bring justice to the workers who had suffered under the contractors' greed. "We're not afraid of you," Monica said, stepping forward despite the workers' protests. Her voice was steady, her gaze unwavering. "You can threaten us, you can try to intimidate us, but you can't stop the truth from coming out. We've already made copies of the evidence. Even if you take these from me, it's too late. The truth is out there." The officer's smug expression faltered for a moment, a flicker of uncertainty crossing his face. He glanced at the contractors, who exchanged uneasy looks. Monica seized the moment, her voice rising. "You've lost," she said. "And you know it. The only question now is how much worse you're going to make this for yourselves." The officer's grip on his baton tightened, his frustration boiling over. But before he could make a move, the sound of distant sirens filled the air. The contractor's eyes widened, and one of them muttered something under his breath. "We need to go," he said, his voice urgent. "Now." The officer hesitated, his gaze darting between Monica and the approaching sirens. Finally, he let out a low growl and stepped back. "This isn't over," he said, his voice filled with venom. "You're going to wish you'd never set foot on that site." With that, he turned and climbed back into the SUV, slamming the door behind him. The vehicle sped off into the night, leaving Monica and the workers standing in the alley, their hearts pounding in their chests. Monica let out a shaky breath, her grip on her satchel tightening. They had won this round, but she knew the fight was far from over. They had the evidence, but now they had to make sure it reached the right hands. And they had to do it before the contractors and their allies struck again. The events of the night lingered in Monica's mind as she sat in her office the following morning, her body still aching from the fall and the chaotic confrontation in the alley. The bundle of documents, now neatly organized and photocopied, lay spread across her desk like the pieces of a puzzle waiting to be solved. Every name, every transaction, and every detail of corruption screamed of the systemic exploitation she had been fighting against for years. Despite the exhaustion that hung over her, Monica felt a renewed sense of purpose. She had faced danger head-on and emerged with the truth, a truth that could no longer be ignored. Miguel sat across from her, his face a mixture of relief and apprehension. He had insisted on coming with her to ensure the evidence made it into the right hands, even though it put him at risk. His bravery, like that of the other workers who had stood with them, was the foundation of everything Monica hoped to achieve. "What happens now?" he asked quietly, his hands fidgeting in his lap. "They're not going to let this slide, are they?" Monica leaned back in her chair, her eyes scanning the papers before her. "No," she admitted. "They're going to fight this with everything they have. They'll deny it, discredit us, and try to bury the evidence. But we're not going to let that happen. We have the truth, and we're going to make sure it's heard." She had spent the early hours of the morning reaching out to allies in the city council, journalists who had covered similar stories, and legal organizations dedicated to exposing corruption. By the time the sun rose, Monica had secured meetings with several key figures. The first would take place in just a few hours, a press conference where she and the workers would present their findings to the public. As the clock ticked closer to the meeting, Monica stood and gathered the documents into a folder. She glanced at Miguel, who had been uncharacteristically quiet. "Are you ready for this?" she asked. He hesitated, then nodded. "I think so," he said. I've never done anything like this before." Monica gave him a reassuring smile. "You're not alone," she said. "We're in this together." The press conference was held in a modest meeting room at a local community center. By the time Monica and Miguel arrived, the room was already filled with reporters, city officials, and supporters from the workers' union. The buzz of conversation died down as Monica stepped up to the podium, the folder of evidence clutched in her hands. Miguel stood beside her, his presence a silent testament to the courage of the workers who had risked everything to bring the truth to light. Monica took a deep breath and began to speak. She described the conditions at the construction site, the exploitation of migrant workers, and the culture of fear perpetuated by corrupt contractors and their enablers in law enforcement. She held up the documents, her voice steady and unwavering, as she detailed the bribes, safety violations, and cover-ups that had led to countless injuries and deaths. "This is not just about one site," she said, her voice rising with conviction. "This is about a system that values profit over human lives, a system that silences those who dare to speak out. But today, that system is being exposed. And it's thanks to the bravery of the workers who refused to stay silent." The room erupted in applause as Monica stepped back from the podium. Miguel took a hesitant step forward, his hands trembling slightly as he adjusted the microphone. "I'm not a public speaker," he began, his voice soft but filled with determination. "But I have to say this. For years we've been afraid of losing our jobs, our homes, our families. Afraid of people like the officer who pushed Monica into that pit. But not anymore. Today we're standing up. And we're not going to stop until justice is done." The applause grew louder, and Monica felt a surge of pride as she watched Miguel speak. This was the heart of her work, empowering people to find their voices and demand the respect and dignity they deserved. As Miguel finished speaking, reporters began firing questions, their voices overlapping in a chaotic chorus. Monica fielded the questions with practiced ease, providing clear, concise answers that left no room for doubt. The evidence spoke for itself, and the reporters seemed eager to run with the story. By the time the press conference ended, Monica felt a wave of exhaustion wash over her, but it was tempered by the knowledge that they had taken a crucial step forward. As the room emptied, she and Miguel were approached by a city council member who had been vocal about labor rights. "This is explosive," the council member said, holding up a copy of the documents. "We're going to push for a full investigation. The contractors, the police department, everyone involved is going to face scrutiny." Monica nodded, her exhaustion momentarily forgotten. "That's all we want," she said. "A fair investigation and accountability for the people who've been hurt by this system." The council member extended a hand, and Monica shook it firmly. "You've done something incredible here," the official said, "but it's just the beginning. Be ready for backlash." The backlash came quickly. Within hours of the press conference, Monica's phone was inundated with messages, some of support, others filled with threats and vitriol. The contractors issued a statement denying the allegations and accusing Monica of fabricating evidence. The officer who had threatened her appeared on local news, claiming he had been trying to maintain order and that Monica had provoked the confrontation. But for every lie they told, Monica had the truth, and the workers who stood beside her were living proof of the injustice they had endured. The following days were a whirlwind of meetings, interviews, and legal filings. Monica worked tirelessly, coordinating with the city council, labor unions, and legal teams to ensure that the investigation moved forward. The workers began to organize, forming a coalition to advocate for safer conditions and fair treatment. Their courage inspired others to come forward, and soon stories of similar abuses at other sites began to emerge. One evening, as Monica sat in her office reviewing documents, her phone buzzed with a text from Miguel. It was a picture of the construction site, now deserted and silent. The caption read, "We did it. They've shut it down." Monica felt a swell of relief and pride as she stared at the image. The fight wasn't over, not by a long shot, but they had won a significant victory. The contractors were under investigation, the officer had been suspended, and the workers had reclaimed their dignity. Weeks later, Monica returned to the site, now cordoned off with caution tape and signs warning of ongoing investigations. She stood at the edge of the pit where she had fallen, her gaze steady as she took in the scene. Miguel joined her, his expression contemplative. "It feels different now," he said. "Like it's finally over." Monica shook her head, a small smile playing on her lips. "It's not over," she said. "But it's a start." She turned to him, her voice firm but kind. "And that's all we need to keep going, a start." As they left the site,